Alright, things are going to start to get a little bit interesting now. We have to get into sort of the heavy duty part of this pipeline, which is working with high-res meshes inside of 3ds Max. Now, very important note before we move on here. I'm going to be importing the high subdivision level mesh from ZBrush, which is almost 15 million polygons. I'm going to be bringing that into 3ds Max for normal mapping. Keep in mind that I'm using a 64-bit pipe. I recommend that you use a 64-bit pipeline as well. If you're using 32-bit, then you're going to end up with a lot of issues when trying to do the workflow that I demonstrate in this training product. Okay? When you're working on AAA game development, you're going to be working with very heavy meshes, huge textures, lots of heavy data, and 64-bit is the only way to go when you're handling that kind of data and moving it in and out of different environments and stuff like that. So keep that in mind. So with that said, before I import this stuff in, I want to take this object here and I want to drop an unwrap UVW modifier on it. I'm going to take all the faces. You can see UVs aren't very good. Whenever you normal map, you want to make sure that you have UVs on your object. So I'm going to collapse that. All I did was a flatten mapping right there. And that's it. The object has some UVs. Perfect. I don't want them overlapping either. Very important. Alright, so the next thing to do is to import our stuff in. So I'm going to go ahead and import the high-res object from ZBrush. Now this object is a 500 plus megabyte file. So it's huge. You can see here in the importer how long it takes it to load up. Okay. That's coming from ZBrush, so I'll use the ZBrush preset. I'm going to take off material. I'm going to hit import, and it's going to start to load it up. Now you can see it's going very, very slow, almost like if we were rendering something in V-Ray or Mental Ray or something like that. Pretty insane. So this thing is almost 15 million polygons. It's a very heavy thing for 3ds Max to handle, but it can handle it because I'm using the 64-bit version of Max 2011. There's a little name conflict here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this high res. So it brought it in. Right now I don't want to move around in my viewport or anything. This object is so dense that it's going to slow down. It's going to kill my performance by a lot. So what I want to do is I want to go to my object properties menu, and it's taken a moment just to load that up, as you can see. And I want to display this as a box. By doing that, I can now move around my viewport without a problem, and I get my performance back. Alright, so let's take the low-res object here, the poly object, and let's go to the render to texture window, and we're going to set some of this stuff up. Alright, so under the render setup, right now we're using the default scanline renderer. In my experience, this renderer just cannot handle heavy meshes like the one that I'm trying to work with. It's not going to be able to load up and render the 14 million polygon mesh from ZBrush. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to Mental Ray, which has better memory management and is more production savvy, so it can handle this kind of stuff pretty easily. So I switched over to Mental Ray. I'm not going to set up an output setting or anything like that. Under projection, I'm going to go to pick, and I'm going to select the high-res object. Now when I do that, it's going to take a moment for 3ds Max to load up the high-res, analyze it, and create the approximation cage it needs to do in all the calculations to get this ready for normal mapping. So this is actually going to take a good couple of minutes, so I'll skip ahead in the video. Okay, so I actually paused the video, so it may have seemed like it went by really quick, but in reality it actually took a good couple of minutes for it to calculate this blue cage you see here, which will help calculate the normal map. So I'm going to go to options here. Under these options I'm going to leave the default. Tangent is fine. Use cage, all this stuff is good. I'm going to go over here to the setup, and for the samples, I might go with something like 16 samples, just so it renders at a pretty good quality. I'm going to close that. I'm going to use the existing normal UV map and all that stuff. I'm going to go to add. I'm going to add a normal map. I'm going to come over here, and for the name, you can name it whatever you want. For the size, I'm going to go with maybe a 512 just to do a test render, see how it starts to turn out. I'm going to go to Bake Material, Output into Source, and that's pretty much it. What I would also do now is I would suggest saving, okay, just in case. We're working with very heavy data, which opens up the possibilities and doors to crashes, freezing, stuff like that. So, right before we actually hit render though, I'm going to come up here to the rendered frame window. I need to adjust a couple of options here before I get started. One thing I want to do is I want to turn on the geometry cache, okay, and lock it down. And I also want to take the final gather and turn that off. It's just going to slow down my rendering if I have that turned on. For the anti-aliasing over here, I think I'm just going to put it on the high setting right here. And that's it. Then I'm going to close this, and then I'll hit render. I'm going to overwrite the previous file. And it's going to go ahead and give us our little progress window here and tell us how everything's coming along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pause the video, skip ahead, and come back to it when it finishes rendering. Alright, so it finished rendering out. It took about almost 7 minutes to render this out. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this object and I'm going to go to Material Slate Editor. And let me see here. This is the low-res material, is this one. Let me go to its properties here real quick. I'm going to go to DirectX Manager. I'm going to do the same stuff as before, turn this stuff on. And I'm going to go to Normal Map. I'm going to make it an instance. Turn on Specular. I'm going to take the diffuse color, knock that down a bit. Alright. And there we go. We can actually see it in the viewport in real time. Actually looks pretty good. And if I create some lights here like I did in a previous video, we'll be able to see this a lot better. So you can see as I move the light, you can see all the detail and stuff from the previous object. Looks pretty cool. In engine, it'll look much better. Okay, pretty cool stuff. Right, so next thing to do would be to go back and render out a higher res map. So maybe like a 1K or even a 2K would work out pretty good. But I'll let you go ahead and take care of that now that you know how to do it. So that's going to do it for this video.